Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to memorialize Jerrold Meinwald, one of the founding fathers of chemical ecology. It's a pleasure to return to Prague after 28 years. I'm one of the 16 people who attended the meeting 28 years ago. I have to speak a little bit louder because of the background noise from outside. I want to acknowledge that I have asked many people for suggestions for the title for this presentation, and I end up selecting the title that was suggested by Julia Meinwald, Jerrold Meinwald's daughter. Also, I want to say that in the interest of time, I'm going to use the AI-generated voice, but only my own voice via AI, for two reasons. Because people say that I speak too fast, and I wanted to control the speed by AI. And the second thing, because this is a very limited time presentation, and I have received so much pressure to finish on time. Actually, the letter that came from TED announced that I was selected to speak. The letter says, the email starts with say, please speak slowly and finish your presentation on time. Congratulations, you have been selected to give the Wittko Francke lecture. So that's a lot of pressure, so I want to make sure that the presentation is going to be enjoyable in the next 2 hours. Thank you very much. So this is just the third Wittko Francke Daaks-Chemicals Memorial Lecture. In the last 2 lectures, Jeremy McNeil delivered the introductory remarks and described the lecture's title. After all, Jeremy and Wittko were very close friends, but unfortunately, Jeremy is not going to be here today, so I asked the Kobe Shaw to give a brief explanation about the lecture's title.
So as most of you know, we had an incredible memorial service for Wittko Francke that Walter Leal organized, and at the conclusion of that, we had this massive effort that Walter Leal again organized to collect funds, to have donations, and that established the Wittko Francke Memorial Lecture. And I want to thank Walter Leal for the tremendous effort that he has made to both having the session as well as establishing this memorial lecture series. I look forward to many years of hearing people talk about various luminaries in chemical ecology in this lecture series.
Christian Francke, Wittko's son, explain what the Daaks-Chemicals is.
They are spelled D-A-A-K-S minus chemicals, and if you look them up, you will immediately find them listed as one of the main sponsors of the ICE annual meeting in Hamburg in 2002. Maybe some of you who joined that meeting back then in 2002 were wondering about this totally unknown company that was listed between giant sponsors such as BASF, BAT, Bayer, and others. You would also not find any other hint in the entire web about them. And I think my father never disclosed what was really behind that donation. Wittko himself, of course, was behind this donation. And Daaks-Chemicals was just a fake company invented by him. And now you know also about the secret behind Daaks-Chemicals.
We cannot talk about the Jerry without talking about the Tom, and of course I'm talking about the Tom and Jerry of chemical ecology, which is a good match with the cartoon.
Here's another Tom and Jerry, and in fact, it's a pretty good match. Here's Tom telling Jerry about snails, about butterflies, about beetles, and that was just what Tom Eisner did. He would tell me these stories, and he would say, could we understand the chemistry underlying the interactions that I'm telling you about? And some of the times I thought we would be able to, and some of the times I thought we would not.
I already had the opportunity to memorialize Tom Eisner at the 2019 annual meeting of the Entomological Society of America. So today is going to be focused on Jerrold Meinwald. Together they collaborate for 5 decades, the most extended collaboration in science, let alone in chemical ecology. The only chemical ecology long duration collaboration that I recall was the David Wood and the Milt Silverstein that lasted for 2 decades. So let's get started with Jerry's bio. I remember clearly that in January 1940, when I just turned 13, I decided to try to pull together my very spotty knowledge of chemistry. I took James Conant's organic chemistry text along with me to the wonderful trip to Florida that my parents arranged in place of a more traditional birthday party. We made the trip from New York to Miami by train, which meant the excitement of occupying an upper berth in a sleeping car, of ordering exotic foods in the dining car, and the chance to read chemistry for hours without feeling guilty. By the time I got back to New York, it was clear to me that I wanted to be an organic chemist and probably a teacher, although I had only the slightest idea of what either of these careers actually involved. Although I was equally fascinated by mathematics, I could not figure out how a mathematician earned a living. While the ritual in which a boy becomes a man at the age of 13 in the Jewish tradition meant very little to me, it happened that my commitment to a life in chemistry coincided exactly with that rite of passage. The research aspect of chemistry became clear to me as an undergraduate at the University of Chicago as a result of taking George Whelan's fascinating advanced organic chemistry course, in which the discussions of stereochemistry and rearrangement mechanisms especially interested me. The chemistry of natural products seemed particularly seductive, and I could hardly believe my good fortune at being admitted to Harvard, where I had not gained admission as an undergraduate, thereby gaining the opportunity to work with my chemical idol, R.B. Woodward. According to Charlotte Greenspan, his wife of 37 years, Jerry got not only the PhD degree in chemistry, but a double PhD degree.
When Jerry was living in Cambridge and getting his PhD at Harvard with Dr. Woodward, he used to say he was studying organic chemistry from the best organic chemist in the world. And while he was there, he was also studying flute with Marcel Moïse, who Jerry called the best flute player in the world. So he was very pleased with his education in Harvard or in Cambridge.
Jerry joined the faculty at Cornell in the early 50s and he served the faculty there for over 65 years. He raised to the ladder, starting as an assistant professor, and he ended up retired as a Goldwin Smith Professor of Chemistry, but he remains as a retired professor until the time of his passing. He was an outstanding teacher, but he never taught music to anyone else except for one student.
And of course, he taught me music as well. He would sit with me every day when I practiced clarinet, and he taught me how to sort of be mindful about it and really listen to what I was doing. And I think at a broader level, he passed his passions on to me, both for music and for food. Whenever I'm planning a menu now or thinking about where to eat in a new city, I feel like I'm connected to my dad.
Flute gave him not only fame, but also saved his life at least once, according to Lucy Vangan, one of his first secretaries.
Jerry, in his wonderful Jerry-like fashion, figured out how to be found in Calcutta in the train station when somehow he lost the directions for where to meet his colleague. And this was before cell phones, so he was looking around at throngs and throngs of people and decided, I need to be found. So he took out his flute and started playing. And his colleague from, I don't know how many, train stops away, eventually was wandering around, eventually heard this familiar flute music. And he followed the music and eventually found Jerry. And they put the flute away and off they went to their conference.
Between his first paper in 1953 and the first chemical ecology paper in 1954, and the last paper that he produced as a position paper 2 weeks before his passing. Jerry published as many as 422 peer-reviewed papers, many of them in very outstanding journals. One question is that how did he meet Ton, who became a long-time collaborator?
And we were introduced by a mutual friend who was Howard Schneiderman, who had somehow knew us both from Harvard. And when Tom Eisner came to Cornell, Schneiderman actually brought him around to my office and said, here's our youngest faculty member in entomology, and he does some interesting work involving insect chemistry, and maybe you can give him a hand now and then. And so I began to talk with Tom Eisner. We'd often have lunch over in the Statler, and he would tell me, in one lunch, he would tell me about a half-dozen different insect stories that seemed to involve chemistry. I had a hard job keeping these stories distinct one from the other. And some of them clearly involved chemistry that you could approach and it would be fun to do, and some involved maybe high polymers, and I didn't know quite how to work on those problems. He knew a lot of natural history, so he knew the lives of insects in great detail, and he had a talent for bringing these insects into the lab, and if they had behaviors that involved chemistry, he would be able to dissect out the glands that contain the active chemicals, and then he didn't know where to go from there.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if he brought over a little glass vial and said, you know, here's some stuff that has interesting biological activity, can you figure out what it is?
Ton have a different explanation. He said that he was not looking for a chemist, he was looking for a musician, but he met both in Jerry, a musician and an outstanding chemist. The first research paper was reported at the 11th International Congress of Entomology in Vienna in Austria in 1906. They report that when attacked, scorpions shoot acetic acid and the caprylic acid, also known as octanoic acid, and it ended up that the octanoic acid was very important for this penetration to the insect cuticle, as depicted here in this elegant bioassay developed by Tom Eisner. As you see here, they're using bromothymol blue, and if the acetic acid penetrates, which happens only together with caprylic acid, then it becomes yellow, as shown here.
And one isn't going to become a famous chemist based on finding acetic acid.
Yeah, that was the first chemistry was acetic acid, but that project actually stimulated Jerry for the long-term collaboration with Tom Eisner. And their first publication was in the Journal of Insect Physiology in 1961, and then they published 132 papers in chemical ecology. Of that, 15 papers were in science. In particular, in 1966 was a very good year. They have 5 papers published in science. Jerry went on and published his own papers in Science and in Nature, altogether 21 papers. And he also published 21 papers in the Journal of Chemical Ecology. This is the initiation of chemical ecology as we know it. However, the term chemical ecology itself appears first in 1970. And this publication, this book by Sondheim and Simeoni, where they used the term chemical ecology for the first time. However, ecological chemistry was used 1 year before and appears in Scientific America. And this picture of Scientific America was shared by Wittko, Francke. So this was the first indication of the work appeared, the terminology of chemical ecology, although the science started earlier. So here's Jerry explaining the earlier days of the collaboration with Tom Eisner. Our initial joint explorations were concerned with the chemical defense mechanisms of various insects and other terrestrial arthropods. This was an area of biology that Tom knew intimately. While arthropod chemical warfare is a fascinating phenomenon, it had been almost completely ignored by chemists up to this point. This meant that we could do research in this field without being subjected to the intense competitive pressure characteristic at the time of the area of natural product synthesis, in which dozens of brilliant colleagues often pursue the same objective. John Clark, a colleague from Cornell, who is now at Harvard, explaining how Jerry conducted his research activities.
Well, Jerry was often in scientific, I'll say, combat, two people trying to figure out the structure of some unusual natural product or the mechanism of some reaction. And you've been around long enough to know that, very often there were hard feelings about that. It became personal. With Jerry, it never did. I mean, he did not view it as a competition, didn't even really view it at a lower level as a game. He just viewed it, they had similar interests, and, someone would get it first, and that would be that. He was really just, a remarkably gentle and congenial colleague.
One of these friendly competitors was Dédé. According to Jacques Pastilles, Jerry and Désiré Dalloz, also known as Dédé, had great mutual respect and close friendship not only in science but also in music. Dédé, not being himself a performer musician, had an exceptional culture in classic music. I don't know when and how they discovered this mutual passion, but I remember that Jerry, being a flutist, asked Dédé to help him to have contact with a worldwide Belgian expert in flutes from which he could obtain the magic flute. Of course, Dédé knew the person and was able to help Jerry fully. As far as science is concerned, I know that when I received the silver medal, Jerry felt, and I fully agree, that Dédé should have shared it. Tom introduced many friends to Jerry, and Jerry introduced many friends to Tom, including one of them, Jean Hildebrand, heavyweight, literally a heavyweight, chemical ecologist, and the international secretary of the National Academy of Science.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to celebrate Jerry Meinwald. Walter, it's really generous and thoughtful of you to put this together, and I am so honored to be part of it. Jerry was very important to me, as he was to you and many other colleagues. I first met him in the early 1970s. I think it was 1972 when I visited Cornell. And I had already heard a lot about him from Tom Eisner, whom I had known for almost 10 years before that. And their reputation was so pronounced and so admirable that it was a huge honor to say that by then I knew both of them. Jerry was remarkably welcoming to me. I had just discovered that this field of chemical ecology was being developed and that they were really arguably the founders. And when I told Jerry about my interests and background and confessed that I really had no formal training in chemical ecology, he was extremely encouraging and welcoming. What we did have in common is chemistry. I had been, as an undergraduate, a student of chemistry at Harvard, and in fact, sort of knew his PhD advisor, the legendary Robert Woodward. And my own PhD advisor had been a student of Robert Woodward before Jerry was, so that was a nice connection. And we shared lots of gossipy stories about faculty and chemistry at Harvard. But then we discovered another common thread between the two of us, and it was a lifelong thing. As long as I knew Jerry, this was important. And that is, we both had really strong background and commitment and love of music. Jerry was notorious for always bringing his flute everywhere he went, and whether it was a chemical ecology meeting or a seminar in a university, he always pulled out his flute and played a little bit, whether people were ready for that or not. And I really admired that. Unfortunately, I couldn't do that because I didn't have an instrument that fit in my breast pocket the way he did. But it was such a charming thing for me that music was so important for him as it was for me. Finally, Jerry and his wife Charlotte were very good social friends of mine. We often met at meetings of the American Philosophical Society and shared a lot of good times together. And I must say that I deeply miss Jerry. And once again, I'll just say it again, I'm so honored that I'm part of this celebration. Thank you so much, Walter.
Tom and Jerry influenced many scholars, including Kobe Shaw.
Yes, both Jerry Meinwald and Tom Eisner were tremendous influences on me. But in the very early days of chemical ecology for me, which were in the mid-1980s, I of course knew of Tom Eisner, I knew of Jerry Meinwald, but of the Tom and Jerry team, Tom Eisner was much easier for me to connect with because he was the biologist, he was the entomologist. So a book like this is For Love of Insects by Tom Eisner. I still use it in all my chemical ecology teaching. The stories are amazing. Jerry Meinwald is highlighted just about in every chapter because Jerry Meinwald was responsible for all the chemistry that, Tom Eisner did the biology. So I got to know Tom very early on as a biologist, entomologist. Jerry's chemistry was too complex for me to understand. And it took much later getting to know Jerry and getting to understand him, not just as a chemist, but also as a person, as an amazing musician, as an incredible person that's involved in civic issues in Ithaca, and as a person who's contributed enormously to chemical ecology in so many ways, as president of the International Society of Chemical Ecology, as one of the founding members of the society, but I think most importantly, as a key proponent of chemical ecology, of the discipline of chemical ecology, both in the US and at the international level.
Jerry had a tremendous influence on me. He visited my lab in Japan multiple times, and he was always interested in the science and always interested in an opportunity to play his flute with Japanese colleagues. He also influenced not only me, my students, and their students as well. So here's Paul Zarbin.
Walter, the first time that I met Jerry was in your lab in Japan in 1996 when I was making my PhD under your supervision. I remember that I was in the lab and I was working and I got a very interesting result associated to the biosynthesis of GCAD of an insect that we are working on the biosynthesis, and I went to your office to show you the results that I have obtained. And Jerry was there talking to you. And then you introduced me to him and you asked me to explain to him a little bit of the work that we were developing together. And he just said, wonderful word. And that was just 2 words that really made my day because I get a seal of approval from Jerry Meinwald. That was really fantastic.
And he is Diogo Paulo's student.
My name is Jerrold, and I am a professor of organic chemistry in the Federal University of Minas Gerais in Brazil. The first time I met Professor Jerrold Meinwald was in 2009 in Indianapolis during an Entomological Society of America meeting. And at that time, I was a young undergraduate student and an enthusiast of chemical ecology. And for me, meeting one of its great founders was a blend of pure inspiration and admiration.
He made an influence in many people, including various young scholars that he come to the meeting and talk to them, one of them, Alvin He.
Jerrold Meinwald is a legend and an inspiration to everyone, including myself. I first met Jerry in Shanghai, China, 25 years ago when I was a postgraduate student attending the first Asia-Pacific Conference on Chemical Ecology. Jerry has just finished his plenary and the session was just over and I ran up to him to say hi, to introduce myself, and I was very surprised when Jerry stopped. He looked at me and said, "Hello, Alvin." To this day, Jerry is an inspiration. I met him later in 2014 in Urbana-Champaign when May Mermon hosted the 2014 ISE meeting, and then after that in 2017 in Kyoto for the joint ISE ethics meeting. He never forgot me. And what I learned from him is that he never stopped to make time for students. And this is really an inspiration because it tells me of how humble Jerry was and how he never stopped to listen to even a graduate student. So thank you, Jerry. You have been an inspiration.
Carl Castling, one of Jerry's contemporary chemical ecologists, he speaks of him in high regard.
I admire Jerry Meinwald as a most distinguished scientist and a noble person. I enjoyed attending Jerry's lectures at several conferences and hearing him play his touching flute. He was one of the founding fathers of chemical ecology.
Tom and Jerry received many accolades, but they were always very good, very easy to work with people, and had fun with the people that work with them. Here's the story of Lucy Bufagin.
He would sometimes name chemicals. I know you're going to talk to Lucy. He named Lucy Bufagins after her.
Well, Tom Eisner and Jerry were very playful, and they had fun with the people that worked with them. And they tried to convince me, somewhat tongue-in-cheek, that they had named the compound Lucy Bufagin after me, given that my name is Lucy. What, of course, they maybe didn't realize is that my name in my native country actually means light, and it's a Latin derivative. So in many languages, it's the primary word term for light. So of course they would name a compound that's based on firefly compounds, something with the word Lucy in it, and I did not fall for it.
So the story of the day is Lucy Bufagina goes to the female fatale. There's two species here. One species on the left, the species that Photurius, that she emitted the light and attract the male of the same species. And after they mate, she sends the different types of light signal that attract of a male of another species, the Photinus, which is rich in Lucy Bufagin. So basically, she prey on the species to acquire the chemical that they do not have to protect themselves. To make a long story short, here it is. They send the light signal and attracting the male from the same species, and later on attract the male from a different species. And this is an advantage for the species A on the left side, the Photurus, because they now with the Lucy Bufagin, they prevent the attack by jumping spiders. And it designed this very elegant say here where they show if they feed these species with Bufagin, as shown in the bottom, they are not attacked by the jumping spider. However, if they are LBG free, they are devoured by the spider. André Gonzalez, who was a president of the International Society of Chemical Ecology, went on and showed that this also has an advantage for the offspring, because this is carry on to the eggs, and the eggs are protected if they have Lucy Bufagin. So this is a textbook story, and actually appears in cartoons.
Tom was especially proud that this particular bit of work got incorporated not into a textbook, but into cartoons. And so these ladies say, so the female firefly of one species imitates the mating signal of another species in order to eat the male, and her friend says, just out of general high spirits or what? And she correctly explains, dining on the male allows her to acquire a chemical that wards off attacks from birds, bats, and spiders. Her friend says, I wonder how long it took the gals to notice that secondary benefit.
Jerry loved cartoons. This is one of cartoons. He especially liked the cartoons from the New Yorker. This was one of the cartoons that was collected from one of his presentations. Many thanks to Rita Prisik, his last secretary, that was able to recover that cartoon. Jerry was known as a gourmet. Here is John Clark.
Another thing that I remember about Jerry was something that I think is less well known. So people know about his science, his love of music, but I don't think they know how interested he was in fine restaurants. And I think Jerry loved living in Ithaca, loved being at Cornell and in the department, but he really did miss fine restaurants. Probably the best restaurant, best meals that could be had when I was there were at Jerry's house.
Tula Tigali, a long-term collaborator, prepared a special dinner for him.
Jerry had his 65th birthday, and we wanted to give him some exquisite dinner because he was a real connoisseur and knew so much about culinary delights. So the idea was to prepare like a publication, like the menu would be like a paper or a collection of papers that you would publish in Journal of Chemical Ecology. So that means it should have an abstract, it should have an introduction, and especially experimental section about and a discussion section. So every participant was asked to bring a dish and prepare this paper about the culinary delights and especially about the chemistry, especially about the aromas or toxins and if you talk about the plants and these plants had certain pests and maybe what is involved and the chemistry behind it. So it was very interesting, but we gave it to Jerry as a surprise. He didn't expect it. And that was the height of the day. He said, oh, it's not eating, we have to do some reading also.
And what about his 90th birthday?
When Jerry turned 90, he thought, oh, we should celebrate with a good meal because he did appreciate good food. And he thought, yes, celebrate with a good meal. Let's go to Paris to do that. And we did.
Jerry left a legacy in chemical ecology and organic chemistry. ASCP states that he left an indelible mark in organic chemistry. He's one of the main, the Meinwald rearrangements. This one in particular is the acid catalyzed rearrangement of cyanic acid. He decided to work on this particular project when he was reading an obituary of Hans Rupert. He was very young at that time. Old people normally read the obituary so they see that they are not there and they can go to work. But Jerry was very young at that time and he read the obituary and got an inspiration to study this reaction because it was suggested that there was a migration of a methyl group. And Jerry didn't like that and have an alternative hypothesis. He suggested that instead of a migration, there was a shifting of the carboxyl group. And he proposed that, and he demonstrated that it was the case. He is giving a lecture when he proposed that, and he gives this particular lecture. By the way, he was a very good instructor. He loved teaching, and he taught chemistry and the fundamental chemistry. Indeed, he was one of the pioneers of having the language of chemistry for non-scientific majors taught at Cornell. And the course remains to this day. And the course catalog says that the course seeks to prepare students to be informed voters. At that time, Jerry used carbon-14 to test his hypothesis. So the idea was he made this compound, the cyanic acid with carbon-14, and if the reaction goes as the mechanism proposes, and there was a 100-years-old mechanism proposed, that would generate iodoform as a cold compound, as shown in the right side, CHI3. However, if his mechanism of the reaction was the correct one, then we would get the iodoform in the hot form, radioactive compound, and indeed the result shows that it was a radioactive compound. I suggested that was loss of CO and the acceptance again of CO during this process. Here's a snapshot of the discussion that Jerry had with Saul Weinstein, a professor from UCLA that was visiting at Cornell when he came out with the idea of the mechanism for this proposed reaction. So that's one of the many Meinwald rearrangements that you find in the literature, and Jerry was very proud of this particular one because he dismissed a 100-year-old hypothesis. So he was justifiably proud of these achievements. He was a very good team builder. He came to Cornell and then met Tom Asner, but also he hired John Clark. He helped hire Wendell Rudolph to the Geneva campus. Cornell has two campuses, one in the entomology has one campus in Ithaca and another one in Geneva. Tom Asner at that time was in the Ithaca campus, and they hired Wendell Rudolph to the Geneva campus. Then Paul Finn was already there, and they teamed up to teach the first course in chemical ecology in the nation. And also, Jerry helped recruit Milton Silverstein, who was at Stanford, and they have bring him to SUNY at Syracuse. And also, when the Boys-Thompson Institute transferred to Ithaca, Alan Renwick became another sort of network with Jerry, which continues to this day with the second and the third generation of chemical ecologists. So he was a team builder and participated in this first course in chemical ecology.
There's no question that he was essentially unique in my mind, an amazing role model for anyone interested in the chemical aspects of chemical ecology. He was had a brilliant mind. His experimental techniques in synthesis and analysis were always elegant. There was an artistic component to them that was often lacking in chemical research. He gave the chunk of lectures, 5 or 6 lectures in our chemical ecology course, and of course I was sitting in on them, and I think the students were often just spellbound by the elegance of his work. He was unassuming, very approachable, so students found it easy to ask him questions, patient, and I just think that we wouldn't have had a successful course without his contribution. I can't think what we would have done in terms of covering the kind of sophistication of chemistry that he was able to bring to bear in teaching that course.
He also collaborated with Wendell Rudolph, and they published papers together, including this one here in Science. Here's Wendell.
I want to thank Walter Leal for pulling me out of La La Land in Florida and giving me the opportunity to say a few words about my good friend and colleague, Jerry Meinwald. My memory of things over 60 years ago might be a little fuzzy, but I want to relate a few interactions with Jerry from back in the day that should be different from what others have said about this amazing scientist. Now, in the early 60s, I was a PhD student in chemistry at Indiana University. At some point, I was able to attend the National American Chemical Society meeting and came across a key lecture in a symposium by this famous scientist named Jerry Meinwald. He wowed the audience with some synthetic pathways for complex natural products, but stopped at one point and said something like, "Well, since time is the essence, I will move on to the next structure." But then he paused and said, "Is time really the essence here?" That was humorous to the audience to think that anything could compare to the essence of his wonderful chemistry. Then in 1964, we crossed paths again. I was a postdoc in chemistry with Dr. House at MIT. He came to me one day and said that his friend, Jerry Meinwald, was contacting several of his friends to tell them about a new position that was being advertised in the entomology department at Cornell. It was to work on sex pheromones of insects, and they wanted a chemist. So the search committee hooked up with a famous chemist at Cornell to get a good applications. I first looked up information on pheromones and then on what entomology meant, since I had not taken any courses in it and didn't really know what it was. It all sounded great, and I thought being at the same university with Dr. Meinwald was a plus. I applied and was hired. Well, that worked out well, since I was privileged to join Drs. Meinwald, Eisner, and Feeney in what I think was the first chemical ecology course in the United States. Our team teaching of this course continued over the next couple decades. Eisner and Meinwald also teamed up on research projects and became known as the fathers of the field of chemical ecology. What a great honor it was for me to closely interact with these giants for my entire career. Now, the team of Eisner and Meinwald also performed together in various international meetings, Cornell functions, etc., as a piano flute duo. I think that Meinwald had to choose early on about becoming a professional flute player or being a renowned scientist. Well, he ended up being both. And now, after all the numerous accolades given to Jerry over his career have been recounted by many other colleagues and friends, I think that one thing stands out to me from all of my interactions with Jerry, and that is that he, above all, was a wonderful, wonderful person in many ways. So now, I will go and kick back in the fog and contemplate my memories of Jerry.
There are things also that Jerry didn't do.
There were some things that you never saw Jerry do. One was lose his temper. We were married 37 years. I never saw him lose his temper. Sometimes he'd get frustrated, and then his choice word was typical if something was going wrong. But he did not lose his temper. Also, in 37 years of marriage, I'd never heard Jerry use a swear word. He never swore. He just didn't. In the same way that Jerry mainly liked to do what he did very well, one of the things he chose not to do was any kind of sports activity, with the exception of ping pong. He did play ping pong very well, but other sports or jogging or even biking were just things that did not interest him at all. So he didn't do them.
But he gave a very thoughtful pieces of advice.
I actually applied to Cornell to work with Jerry. I was a chemist, so I was naturally attracted to the chemical identification and synthesis work that he was doing. But after a conversation, it was clear to him, though not yet to me, that I was actually more fascinated with the biological interactions than the chemistry itself. So it was Jerry who introduced me to Tom Eisner and Wendell Roelofs, who became my co-advisors, and for me at least, the rest is history. You know, I will always credit Jerry for seeing a scientific temperament in a young scientist that she couldn't see in herself. And he really had that gift with everyone around him. And I'm forever grateful to Jerry and his continued support of my career as long as I knew him.
Jerry served as the president of the International Society of Chemical Ecology. He was actually the 50th president of the society at a time that we had a target in the nation. Nancy Target was the secretary, and Jimmy Nations was our treasurer. And that's when Jimmy met Jerry for the first time.
Well, Walter, I think it was when Jerry was about to become the president of the ISCE. I had made an appointment, I was on the Cornell campus, made an appointment to come by his office. And I think we talked about the society and the business of the society. He was very interested in ISCE and in the Journal of Chemical Ecology. And I probably had a few questions to ask him about both of those things. I think that was just about the time I had started as an editor of Journal of Chemical Ecology. And I knew he was a flautist, and I saw his flute in the case underneath the desk where he was working. And I had hoped he would maybe take it out and play it, but I didn't ask him to do that, of course. But I did hear him play it later, I think at the Prague meeting. And he was a wonderful musician, a great chemist, and a warm personality to talk to and to get to know.
As member of the editorial board of the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, Jerry opened the door for the publication of outstanding papers in chemical ecology. In fact, he handled as many as 651 manuscripts during his tenure as a member of the editorial board, and this is the last paper that was published under his supervision. He's always giving good advice and always looking for young generation of scholars, and here's one of his advice to them. For young readers, I should point out that we usually talk more about our research successes than our failures, which nevertheless are numerous. It is one of the privileges of academic life that we are allowed to quietly forget projects that have not worked out, so long as we end up with a reasonable yield of successful outcomes. There are, of course, occasions where much can be learned from a failure, or where other researchers can at the least be saved the effort of repeating an attempt that seemed attractive but turned out not to work. Jerry organized in 1994 a colloquium in chemical ecology at the National Academy of Science, and about 10 years later, May Berenbaum and Jean Robinson did the same when the Bonnie Basler met Jerry for the first time.
I first met Jerry 20-some years ago at a National Academies conference on chemical communication. At that time, being a newish professor, I thought I was the only one working in the field. However, the speakers at the conference introduced me to chemical communication in worms and mice, bees and moths, marine snails and plants, while I held forth about my precious bacteria. Then there was the after-dinner speaker, Jerry Meinwald. I confess to thinking, I don't know if I can pay attention to yet another talk. Jerry walked up to the podium so regal, with that shock of white hair and distinctive speaking style. Truly, my stereotype of the crusty, judicious senior academic. I thought, oh boy, this is going to be dry. Then, Jerry delivered a magnificent, captivating talk, using only New Yorker cartoons as his slides. The talk was hilarious and riveting and deep. Each cartoon mapped to a profound discovery made by Jerry or his longtime partner Thomas Eisner. We learned and learned, and we laughed and laughed. That meeting was the start of a long-time friendship. Jerry introduced me to Charlotte, and we three crossed paths at many scientific junkets. Also, Jerry worked behind the scenes to propel my budding career forward. He never said a word to me about his efforts, but others clued me in. There's no doubt that Jerry's kindness contributed to where I am today. Beyond science, from Jerry, I learned the importance of generosity, happy accidents, and unlikely friendships. Cheers.
What was Jerry as a father? What kind of pet he gave to his daughter Julia?
When I wanted a pet, he brought me home a little cockroach from his lab. I was one of the only kids I knew with a pet cockroach.
Being a cockroach has to come from Kobe's lab.
Yes, indeed, it did. This goes back to a project that we started with Wendell Roloffs and Fran Webster. Wendell Roloffs, of course, at Cornell, and Fran Webster in Syracuse. And we identified a very interesting pheromone for the brown-banded cockroach called supellapyron. And this alpha pyron structure had two chiral centers, but we never solved the stereochemistry of this pheromone. And the following year, in 1994, was the International Society of Chemical Ecology meeting in Syracuse. And that's where I met Walter Leal. And Walter Leal was on sabbatical with Jerry Meinwald. And at the end of the meeting, Walter Leal took me to Jerry Meinwald's lab, and I met Jerry Meinwald. And he showed me this beautiful GC EAD that he set up, and he had this great idea to work on a stereochemistry of supellapyron. So he set up this chiral GC connected to an EAD. To my knowledge, no one's ever done that before. That was incredible. And in fact, was able to separate the 4 stereoisomers. Shortly after that, Jerry's group synthesized all 4 stereoisomers. And of course, Kenji Mori had to do the same. And Kenji Mori actually did it faster. and by having the synthetic compounds, we're able to confirm Walter Leal's finding based on the GC EAD. So to do all of that, I had to send cockroaches to Walter in Jerry Meinwald's lab, and that's where the cockroach came from.
That's the structure of supellapyron. In 2010, out of the blue, I got a package from Jerry Meinwald, which became very handy in preparation for this lecture. November 22, 2010. Dear Walter, I am enclosing a bit of biographical material and a few key reprints, plus one preprint that I have worked hard on. I hope you can use them in some way or another. Right now, some serious health problems have arisen, and I am going to the Cornell Medical School in NYC for some consultation. So I will be out of touch for a while, but back on Monday. Thanks for your very kind note. Cheers, Jerry. After that, Jerry received the Benjamin Franklin Medal in Chemistry in 2013. He is an accepted of the recommendation letter by John Pickett. In the tradition of Benjamin Franklin himself, he has been outspoken where scientific comment is most valuable, for example, in the absolute need to protect our chemical arsenal by supporting the conservation of species diversity, not just for providing new tools in medicine and pest management, but even for unforeseen opportunities in the future. In 2014, we received the highest honor in the United States of America, the National Medal of Science. That year was a particular...
National Medal of Science to Jerrold Meinwald, Cornell University, for applying chemical principles and techniques to studies of plant and insect defense and communication, and for his seminal role in establishing chemical ecology as a core discipline important to agriculture, forestry, medicine, and environmental science.
It was a particular good year for chemical ecology because not only Jerry, but Mayberry and Bauer also received the National Medal of Science, 2 National Medal of Science in that year for chemical ecologists. What would Jerry say after receiving the National Medal of Science?
If you know my dad, you know that he's the master of understatement. So his description of getting the National Medal from President Obama was, it's a very nice thing.
One of the postdocs or former collaborator of Jerry who was there, Tappy Jones.
So I was a postdoc with Jerry from January 1975 through the first half of 1977. And he essentially gave me my career. I really didn't know what I was doing professionally then, and he was very kind to me. He had the rare ability to put people on projects they would be successful with. And of course, the collaboration with Tom Eisner was fascinating. Later, in the early 1980s, I was teaching at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis, and he and Charlotte and their infant daughter, Julia, visited my wife and I. It's a tourist place. They were being tourists. So that happened. And in 2014, for some reason, of all of his postdocs, I was invited to the gala for the National Medal of Science celebration at the Ritz-Carlton in Washington. I had to rent a tux and everything. And Jerry and May Berenbaum and I were standing around chatting, and this young lady walks up and says, "Hello, I'm Julia Meinwald." And it took me a minute to make the connection, and I sort of blurted something like, "The last time I saw you, you were a little baby like this, and I could hold you in my arms." And I looked out of the corner of my eye, and Jerry was amused by that whole thing. And that evening was an amazing, and it was a really happy time. It was sadly the last time I saw him, but if anyone ever deserved that honor, it was him, and I will always be grateful for his kindness.
Jerry left a legacy in chemistry and chemical ecology, and here's a question that the Kammerschlager asked him many years ago.
Several decades ago, when I was a professor at Simon Fraser University, he was invited as an external speaker in our seminar program, and I was assigned, as was the custom, to making sure that he had a comfortable visit. One particular conversation stands out. At some point during the conversation, I asked him how he would know if his life's work had a lasting impact. And he replied that he thought that he would have to pass on first to the next life. And then if people that came after him used his ideas and his works as the foundation for the work that they did and the discoveries that they made, then his work would have been meaningful. I thought that was very insightful.
Indeed. There's an enormous body of evidence indicating that Jerry's life work had an impact on chemical ecology and organic chemistry. Here's one of them, famous, another of Meinwald's rearrangement. When the compound 1 became available, Jerry wanted to make the epoxide 2. And when he started this reaction, instead of an epoxide, he got a carboxylic group in the product that is shown by IR spectrum of a carbonyl band. And also the NMR spectrum, a doublet that indicated that this was an aldehyde. So Jerry thought that this could be aldehyde 4 or aldehyde 5, the blue one depicted here. And he proposed a mechanism of rearrangement. And then, because the aldehyde 5 was unstable, he oxidized that to get the corresponding acid and reduce the double bond, and then make the synthetic compound and demonstrate that, in fact, the product of this reaction is number 5. It's not only to show the arrangement itself, but then with that, he demonstrated a facile synthesis of a bicycle hexane with a double bond or without a double bond, and the position 6 have a substitution. This became very handy, very important for organic chemistry, and even today, when Jerry passed, the cover of the Journal of Organic Chemistry was this illustration, what is sometimes called also the House-Meinwald rearrangement. House being the professor that was the host or the supervisor of Wendell Rudolph's. Last year alone, there were at least 4 papers published, including this paper here, Nature Chemistry, about the Meinwald rearrangement. The Meinwald rearrangement is very useful, and now with the application of enzymes, they are improving the stereoselectivity of the reaction process. So that's very clear evidence there that his work is still effective today, is being used very frequently.
Even in his last few days, when it was towards the end enough that he couldn't speak, and so he would sometimes write us notes. And one of the things that happened in those last few days is some dear friends came over to play organ music, and they played him a concert on our 2 pianos, not on organs. And he wrote them a little note that just said, "The music was to die for." So this very, very sharp sense of humor.
Yes, indeed. And also, I honored to be here today and to give you this presentation. I want to give a special thank you to Rita Persic, everyone else who contributed to this lecture, participate in some sort of video. We also celebrate Jerrold Meinwald, his 90th birthday in Kyoto at the joint meeting of the International Society of Chemical Ecology and the Asia Pacific Association of Chemical Ecologists. In closing, let me introduce you the message that Jerry left for the next generation of chemical ecologists, as we have at least eight of them today here.
It's important to understand, and especially if you study the chemistry of disease vectors or of agricultural pests or of forest pests, if you understand how they communicate, maybe you can send them misleading messages and disrupt their lives with non-toxic compounds.
But to Meinwald, that is not the only reason to study chemical ecology.
They're lovely stories to tell people about to say, look how clever nature is. That alone has its own reward. We will understand a lot more about the beauty of nature when you understand what's really going on. It becomes that much more beautiful.
Thank you, Jerry. We shall continue your legacy. Thank you, everyone. Just did 5 minutes over.
That was wonderful.
Okay.
Very much. Thank you very much, Walter. Talking about the giant in chemical ecology, presented by a giant, and he invited many other giants to say this in honor of Jerrold Meinwald. And let's not forget also this award or this lecture is in honor of Wittko Francke.
And the tie is here?
The tie is here, the one that was dedicated to Wittko. Thank you very much. We always keep saying that giving this lecture is not the honor, but we do have a certificate for you, and you did a wonderful job. Thank you very much, Walter, for this excellent presentation. And now time for the other lectures.
All right, thank you.